I've had some life-changing moments throughout my time as a bass player, and I think one of the first was definitely Francois. When I was 6 at my first convention, I saw him play and was kind of just like sold on that. And then at maybe the next convention, I saw Robert Black play and I was like, okay, that's really cool.
This was a very fun conversation, and I can't wait to bring this to you today. I'm Jason Heath. This is Contrabass Conversations, and we are talking today with Kiyoe Kaimana Delphine Wellington. Kiyoe is the granddaughter of George Wellington, the renowned double bass teacher from Hawaii who brought Rabath to Hawaii. We talk about that story. And Kiyoe, ever since the age of 6, has been playing bass, and she was taking daily lessons with her grandfather. And she's been involved in so many bass events over the years, including the Hawaii Contrabass Festival, which I talked with her mom, Fumiko, about not too long ago, just a few weeks ago. And Kiyoe's been going to the International Society of Bassists convention, the ISB convention, for the past 20 years. She, after growing up in Hawaii, she spent a year at the Interlochen Arts Academy, then studied with Todd Seeber at the New England Conservatory, and Todd actually has a connection to George Wellington. He studied with him when he was in Hawaii himself, and Todd came back many times to participate in the Hawaii Contrabass Festival. And then Kiyoe, and we talk about all this in the conversation, Kiyoe went to graduate school at the University of California, San Diego, where she studied with Mark Dresser. She's a passionate advocate about the solo bass, new music, and we've got a link in the show notes you should really check out of Kiyoe playing several years ago when she was 15 on the PBS radio show From the Top. So that is very cool. And Kiyoe right now is a fellow at the Lucerne Symphony in Switzerland. She's going to be taking part of the Lucerne Festival this summer, and I know you're going to love this conversation. Quick shout out to our sponsors, the Bass Violin Shop, Colstein Music, Upton Bass, Steve Swan, and D'Addario Strings. More on them later. And you're going to be hearing some bumper music, which is a piece that Teppo Huata'aho wrote for Kiyoe. This is from this wonderful compilation, 4-CD compilation that Alberto Boccini put together, a tribute to Teppo, and that's Kiyoe playing a piece that was written for her by Teppo. Very cool, and let's dig into this conversation with Kiyoe. It's hilarious that I had your mom on the podcast before you, even though she's not a bass player. So, I think Nick Walker had the idea to contact some different people and just chat about your grandpa. Which so maybe we could start there. And obviously you've done a whole lot in your career, so I'm sure we'll sort of get into some other topics as well. But can you just talk a little bit about your grandpa and him starting you on bass and that whole experience? And that's a very wide question, but
I actually started on violin.
Okay.
And I was studying a little bit with my mom and my grandpa because he also played fiddle when he was young. And when I was 6, I would sit in on his lessons, and I was there when one of his students got a bass in the mail. It was actually really damaged and cracked, but I was totally sold from that moment on, and I think my grandpa was pretty happy about that. So I started on bass when I was 6, pretty immediately after that. And I had lessons almost every day after school, and it was really just a fun time. And the first thing he told me was what a virtuoso is, and it's more important to become a virtuoso than a good bass player. And that's still something I hold on to today.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, sort of transcending the maybe the confines might be the wrong word, but like the traditional role of the double bass and just thinking of yourself as a virtuoso. That's a great concept.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and my teacher at New England Conservatory, Todd Seeber, he also studied with my grandpa in high school, and that's one of the first things he told me too in our first lesson. He said, I'll be really happy if you're on par with the best bass players when you leave here, when your time is finished, but it would really be the best if you were just one of the best musicians and also up there with the violinists and the cellists, and sort of not just think of yourself as limited, like you said, by the traditional roles of what being a bass player is.
Yeah. So did Todd grow up in Hawaii? Todd Seeber, or he went to high school? How did he connect it with your grandfather?
I don't think he spent his entire childhood there, but I know he was in a military family, and I think that's why they were out in Hawaii for a little bit. I'm not sure how long, but I think around middle school or high school. Yeah.
When did the Hawaii the bass festival start? How old were you when that was all getting started?
That was right around when I first started playing also. I think I was 7, so that was 90. I think 99 was the first festival.
And was Francois Rabath, was Rabath at that first festival?
Yes, that's the entire reason why I think my grandpa wanted to start it, was that he was always working with kids, and Francois has a really great way of teaching kids, and so I think there's a funny story behind that, actually, as he was constantly asking him to come out to Hawaii, and Francois was always saying it's too far, and I can't get out there, and it went back and forth for a few years, and finally my grandfather asked him for an autograph, and he was like, okay, sure. And unbeknownst to Francois, it was like this contract that said he would come out to Hawaii.
He tricked him.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's why he came out the first time, and then actually for a handful more afterwards.
Well, if you're going to get tricked into doing something, most people wouldn't mind too much it being going to Hawaii.
Yeah, there are worse places.
But it's got to be an interesting place growing up. I've only been to Hawaii once. I got married on Kauai, and that's now that Southwest has started flying there, I feel like I could go. It's not too far from California, obviously, but I gotta start using some of my points and getting over to Hawaii. Mm-hmm. But like, what was it like being a bass player growing up in Hawaii? Like, what was that, because you've lived a lot of other places. What's sort of special? I know a lot special about Hawaii, but what might surprise people about your experiences or experiences of people growing up there?
Well, as a kid, I was equally immersed in the other arts. And so what's really amazing about Hawaii is that it has a lot of really great places to go, like museums, and a lot of the sort of richer families in Hawaii invested a lot of their money into the arts. And so at the same time that I was learning music history, I could go to one of the museums and see what else was going on in that time. And so it really rounded out my understanding of music and how it developed, because there was all this culture going on in Hawaii, including, Hawaii's own culture. So it was really nice to have so many options. Yeah.
And I think of places that different from each other, Hawaii and Boston. Maybe there are places that are more dissimilar, but like, what was that first winter in Boston like? I grew up in a cold climate, so I'm sort of used to that. But what had you experienced that kind of what I think of as kind of miserable weather before, or was that first winter pretty rough?
Well, I actually spent my my senior year of high school at Interlochen Arts Academy in northern Michigan. Which
That's rough. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I don't know, Boston's winter aren't that, are a little bit tamer than northern Michigan. I think we hovered around minus 30 with a wind chill for about a week in Michigan, and I really had a hard time with, I would be in class from about 7:30 to 5, and the sun would be up between 11:30 and it would be dark again by 4. So there was a period of time where I really wasn't seeing the sun, and that was really hard. So getting to Boston, it was cold, but a little bit more doable.
I can't tell you what because I lived my whole life in a cold climate, and then I moved out to San Francisco about 4 years ago, and I think I've gotten used to just kind of always being fairly nice out now, but like it was like this weight had lifted from me, like that oppressive cold, like what you're talking about. There's like, Chicago would always seem to dip down to a few days of like negative 30 in January or February, and it just wore on my soul, and so I think I'm sort of acclimated to the palm trees and all that kind of stuff now out here, but it was a real shockaroo in the other direction. And now when I go back, I was back in Pittsburgh and Chicago and a bunch of other cold places this winter, and I gave my heavy coat away. I'm ill-equipped for that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I don't know. I kind of like winter time. Maybe it's because I didn't grow up with it, but it definitely is when you're away from it for a while. It takes some getting used to again. Yeah, for sure. I think people that grow up in warmer places, sometimes the novelty of it maybe, or they don't, I don't know. I think maybe it's just because ever since I was a little kid, I just had that sort of hanging over, especially I grew up in South Dakota, which is extremely cold. And so the snow would fall in October and stay through like April or something like that. Mm-hmm. It's interesting, like that sort of mix of arts that you probably grew, or it sounds like you grew up with in Hawaii. I wonder how that maybe because you have what seems to me like a pretty interesting career. You've got a lot of career ahead of you, but you do so many different things that anybody who is attracted to UC San Diego, which I love that place. It's such a cool place for the arts. They're on a path they're probably likely to be on their own path, or a less what we think of as traditional path. They're maybe not, jamming out on Beethoven 5 for 4 hours every day, maybe, but you can see those concerts if you want to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, growing up in Hawaii with all these different influences really got me thinking about my own individuality from a really young age. And I mean, I've always kind of looked a little different than the normal person, maybe, perhaps, or whatever that means. And so I've always tried everything and given my best shot to everything, but if it doesn't feel right or doesn't feel like my authentic self, then I move on a little bit, or sort of try to morph it into something that I can really like dig myself into and be really interested in. And because I have so many influences, I have a lot of interests, of course. And so the past few years have really been me trying to figure out how to combine everything that I'm interested in, because they can sort of seem unrelated sometimes, but I think I'm getting somewhere with it. We'll see.
Samuel Kolstein, who founded Kolstein & Sons back 70 years ago at this point. Sam was largely self-taught. Here's Barry Kolstein about how his father got into the business.
It was mainly self-taught, but I will pay homage to people that need to be paid homage. He did study a bit with Alan Al Eisenstein, who was a great repairman in Manhattan. He was considered one of the top. And Al was very gracious. He allowed my father to sit at his side, watch him work. But a lot of it was self-taught. My father was a very ingenious person. He really would look at a problem and figure out 5 ways of doing it, and then choose the right way always.
Ever since those early years, Kolstein & Sons has been working to solve problems for bass players, provide them with ever better instruments and new opportunities in terms of travel basses and cases and all sorts of things that we need as bass players. Thank you, Barry, and thank you, Kolstein, for everything that you do and for sponsoring the podcast. What is an American style of bass? Here's Gary and Eric from Upton Bass on the topic.
So there's a joke about American instruments, all right? If I can take 4 violins and go to, let's say, a top-notch violin appraiser, and he can take the first one out and look at it and go, well, this one's clearly Italian because of all these features. Next one, well, this is French because of all these features. Next one, no, this is English because of these features. 4th violin, they can't tell what it is, and then they go, it's American. It's got a little bit of everything.
Learn more about their Bostonian, American-style model and so many other things that they have to offer you at uptonbass.com. And thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. This episode is brought to you by the Bass Violin Shop, which opened in 2001 as a small double bass workshop in Greensboro, North Carolina. Today, they're staffed by 3 full-time, highly skilled bass luthiers, and they specialize in double bass sales, rentals, setup, restoration, and repair. For nearly 20 years, they have satisfied thousands of clients by offering quality instruments, knowledgeable service, reliable repairs, and superior restorations at affordable prices. They're always happy to assess basses for trade-in, consignment, or even purchasing outright. Contact them to schedule a time to discuss your bass and your future needs. For more information and current inventory, visit their website at bassviolinshop.com and be sure to follow them on Facebook and Instagram. I think very similar things about the path I'm on and like what am I doing and how can I combine like these disparate elements. I had such a great time. I think it was 2 years ago. I went by UCSD and I sat in on one of Mark Dresser's lessons, and then I interviewed Mark. But I don't remember the name of the piece he was digging into, but it was just really interesting. I'm such a lame like perform. I like play orchestra concerts and that's about it, and a little bit of Trout quintet, and that sort of thing. but I had such a great, my own playing is fairly pedestrian, but I love going to different contemporary music concerts and jazz and exploring all sorts of different styles. And it was so interesting just listening to Mark talk about approaching contemporary music and like just his explorations with the bass. And I saw you've got a couple videos up on YouTube. One is of that Prague, the tribute to Teppo, but the other is this like cool installation piece. It's like you and another bass player playing.
Oh, that's Matt Klein, actually. What
was that I was watching? That was very interesting.
It's this piece called O by our colleague Lydia, I never pronounce her name correctly, so I'm just going to say Lydia. Okay. But she's still at UCSD, and it's this piece that she composed sort of during and out of her influences from her time in Iceland, and it's a piece for 2 basses and spatialization. So we actually played with our friend Johannes also, who in this amazing, it's not a black box, but it sort of acts the same way, but the walls are not black. But it has this amazing sound system in it that has 2 options, and one of the options has speakers pretty much around the entire room. And so we had contact mics on our bridge, and Johannes would send the sounds, these really quiet sounds, all around the room. And it was paired with some photographs that she had taken in Iceland. And it was all about these quiet, really ethereal sounds of the ocean and these very stark environments of the water and the volcanic landscapes. And that's actually something that ties back to what you were saying about Mark's exploration of contemporary music at UCSD. He's so supportive of really the wildest things, and as if it works and sounds good, he tells you to run with it. And Lydia was looking for these really quiet sounds that we weren't achieving with a bow. And no matter what, we tried playing only with a stick, or and it was all too loud. And we spent, I don't know, a few sessions just trying to find a range of sounds that she liked. And she one day brought all these different tools, a bunch of screwdrivers and just random things that she could find that sort of resembled a bow. And we ended up, she ended up liking this sort of metal on metal sound with a string and a screwdriver. And then we're right next door to the visual arts department, and she found someone there to make these really long tin dowels that we played the majority of the piece with. And then her score is kind of graphic, and we discovered that, drawing the dowel horizontally across the string like you would normally with the bow creates one sound, and vertically creates a different type of sound. And then if you do it in a circle, it kind of combines those two things, and really like this huge sound palette that was so quiet, though. I mean, and we ended up playing amplified, of course, because otherwise you would have to stand 2 inches away from us to hear everything. But once you do open up that sound and amplify it, there's really this gigantic range of overtones and different timbres, and it was really interesting. And I don't know of another place where you would be given that. This has happened over a course of a few weeks, I don't know anywhere else where you would be given that much time to kind of explore something so seemingly not that varied. I mean, to the layman's ear, you wouldn't be able to hear this, especially without it being amplified. You maybe wouldn't be able to pick up on the differences because they're so subtle and so intricate. But yeah, we had that freedom, and you still, students there do have that freedom. It's really amazing.
That is super cool. It's so interesting. Like it's like worlds within worlds when you start diving down into. You think, oh, I got these EADG strings, but then you start to start to get into like what you're describing, and it's fascinating. This is at a more basic level, but I've even just been working with some of my own students on just some of the different closed note harmonic possibilities, and it's cool to see their eyes just open up. They're like, what? This is like the bass can do this. If we go back to when you were younger, so there's this. Sorry, I'm jumping around here, but this I think when you were 15, you did that From the Top performance. There's this great video of you. What were you playing? Was it a Rabath piece?
Yes, it's Redba by Rabath.
Oh, right. Okay. I can't believe I can remember the name of that. But so beautiful performance. And that was just very cool to see you featured that way. And like from maybe that age until like now, how has your time with the bass changed? Like you get out the bass here in 2019. What are you doing on the bass on a daily basis? Like, are you practicing your scales? I'm sure you're exploring the bass in a different way now than you were then, but like maybe some things have changed, I'm sure too. Like just how has your actual daily time on the bass changed over the years?
Honestly, I've always been someone who loves playing scales. I still play scales every day. It's kind of just the best. Especially because I have all these etudes from Mark that about like the partials under every note. So it's a lot of just I'm playing in an orchestra right now, so of course I'm practicing some standard rep, which was actually something I hadn't been doing for my entire time at UCSD and before that also. So it had been a few years before I was really in this symphonic setting, and so it actually really took some getting used to again. and really finding the right sounds that I wanted, just this vocabulary that I hadn't been using for a long time. So that's been interesting. And of course, next to it, I'm still always just playing things that I'm interested in. And so I play a lot of the Scotornebio etudes. Yeah, right now I'm just really exploring things that trying to rediscover things that I have played before, but with sort of trying to find more if I can from that music, because I don't really know very many people here, so I'm sort of just being very inward, which is kind of too easy for me to do. But yes, but I'm playing in the Lucerne Festival Academy this summer, and so I'm really excited to work on some contemporary pieces for orchestra, because I really do focus usually on solo stuff and chamber works. So I'm really excited to see how to play and what it's like to be someone playing in an orchestra with all these new ideas. And my motivation for what I do, it really comes from the fact that so much is being discovered about what the abilities of the bass as an instrument, that had never, I don't know, I feel like it's really coming into its own light now. In the past, couple decades, it's really almost a new instrument in a lot of ways.
This episode is brought to you by D'Addario Strings. Our friends at D'Addario want to help listeners change their strings safely and efficiently, and they have a few tricks to help you achieve that. Here's a great tip. Change your strings 2 at a time, removing them from the inside out, then replacing them from the outside in allows for easy access to the lower pegs, ensuring strings lay neatly in the peg box. Learn more at orchestral.daddario.com, and thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. This episode is brought to you by Steve Swan String Bass, and Steve travels far and wide here in the Western United States. Here's Steve on where he goes and what some of the benefits of being able to travel like that are.
You travel with it. You're going up to Oregon. You're going up to Seattle.
Up to Seattle.
Yeah.
And back, out to Arizona. Wherever people want to see a selection, they don't have options, or if I have a line on some basses I want to check out and maybe buy or trade. I have the option. That's the beauty of me not being tied to a workbench in a shop.
Steve works with some of the San Francisco Bay Area's best professional bass luthiers, people like Nathaniel Rich, Alex Friedman, and many others, to get basses playing beautifully. When someone comes to me asking where to look for a bass, whether they're a student or professional, or they're coming through town and they want to try out a great selection of basses, I always send them to Steve. Learn more at steveswanstringbass.com, and thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast, Steve. I hear you. It's phenomenal, and I'm making those discoveries too. As I'm 43, so I'm not that old, but I grew up, in the 90s, and even from then till now, I feel like my eyes have been opened so phenomenally, and a few times by conversations with Mark Dresser or some other people that work in contemporary music, and I remember Mark I might be getting the details wrong, but I think he took a sabbatical and mapped out all these harmonic possibilities on the bass, and then also that particular bass he plays that has the piezo pickups built into the fingerboard to amplify the back lengths of the strings, right? I mean, when you start getting into that whole world, oh my goodness, it's it really is a new instrument, and it's the total possibilities are it's seemingly endless. It's totally fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I've had some life-changing moments throughout my time as a bass player, and I think one of the first was definitely Francois when I was 6 at my first convention. I saw him play and was kind of just like sold on that. And then at maybe the next convention, I saw Robert Black play and I was like, okay, that's really cool. And then Mark came to one of my mom's festivals in Hawaii, and I think he had just gotten those pickups put in his bass. And so of course he was like using them any chance that he got. But it was kind of definitely sold after that of this. Yes, of course I could follow this very, well-tread path of being an orchestral musician, and I'm sure I could, do my best in that area and be somewhat happy, but I'm really fueled by this like unknown territory. And I don't know if I've gone through a lot of times where I feel sort of unsure about what to do, because I've had such an amazing foundation and education in classical playing and technique. And yet I feel really pulled to not do that. So yeah, that's.
Well, I think it's really cool that you're exploring all these different sides of your musicianship, and that you're right now exploring the orchestral side, like traditional kind of setting, and then also the Lucerne Festival, which I know several people who participated in that over the years, and that's an interesting, though orchestral kind of scene. The bass has changed a lot, and you got places like UC San Diego or the Hart School, with Robert Black, that are really exploring, but you still have a lot of people who are, things are slow to change, and classical music in particular is not a the art music world is not maybe, the fastest changing of things necessarily. But I have all these young students I'm running into all the time. One of my students right now, she's a senior in high school, and she's trying to figure out what to do, where to go. And, like so many people, she's switched ideas about 3 or 4 times over the last few months. What would you say to someone like my 17-year-old student, or any young person who's like, maybe not had all these influences you've had, but they're trying to figure out what to do in the world? They think, well, I guess I could play in an orchestra. Maybe I guess I could teach public school. You're exploring and continue to explore all these different avenues. Like what advice would you give to someone kind of heading off to college, thinking about,
I would say definitely look, if you are, of course, there are some people who want to take the orchestral path, and that's completely valid. And it's awesome to know what you want to do early on, because I've had so many years where I'm sort of just like unsure and floating around. And I've always envied my friends who have known what they want from seemingly the get-go. But I would say to really explore those teachers and those studios who are willing to really look at anything with you. My time at NEC was really amazing because the bass department was so tightly knit there that if I wanted to take something to a different bass teacher, there was no competition or problem with you. There was no problem that would happen. And of course, Don Palma's there at NEC, and he's an amazing orchestral musician, but also this also amazing contemporary player. And Figment 3 was, composed for him by Carter. And so you had so many options there. And the bass players in the jazz and contemporary improvisation departments at NEC also have the options to study with a classical bass teacher. So there was a lot of mixing going on, and my teachers really supported my endeavors in the CI department. I was in a few ensembles that were playing music that I didn't get to play in orchestra, of course, in these smaller ensembles and improvisation ensembles. And so, of course, I'm a little biased and I love my school, but there are, of course, other studios and other schools that also will give you that option. And I think if you're not sure what you want to do, but you know that you want to be an awesome bass player, I would say to really look for those places. And they're definitely available. And you know, there's not just 2 schools that you could go to. I think a lot of teachers are definitely really into this fact that the bass is still evolving, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Are you going to be at ISB this summer?
It's my first one in 20 years that I won't be able to attend. I have a chamber concert with the other interns in the orchestra that I'm playing with right now. So unfortunately, I won't be able to come, which is kind of funny because it's like the one convention where maybe I should be there, but.
Well, that's his life. You can't make them. I couldn't go for a long time. I always had work conflicts, but 20 years. You've been going for 20 years to those conventions. That's amazing.
I went to my first one at 6, and I've gone to every single one since then. It's just kind of crazy to think about. I still have these. I would get like unruled composition books and have a journal for the first couple conventions, and I still have those. I have some like really hilarious portraits that I made of like John Kennedy and other people, Barry Green, and these people that I've now known that have seen me kind of grow up and have always supported my very unconventional ways. Yeah, so unfortunately I can't be there, but I definitely hope I'll be kept. Everyone will let me know what's going on.
I'm sure, yeah, and I'm sure we'll see you at the next one. And boy, those would be fun notebooks to look through from age 6 on. How cool is that? That's yeah, wow. Well, let's not have this be the only time we ever chat. I'd love to have, I was before we chatted, I was on the line with Renan Meyer, and I kind of, every time I talk to somebody, I have like, I put in my notes like round 1, round 2. That was round 4 with Renan. So I would love to have a round 2 and 3 and 4, and like anytime you got anything new that's coming up, or if we're at the same event, I'd love to just see what's up with you and keep connected. And yeah, I really appreciate it. Yeah, absolutely. We should have done this years ago. So I appreciate you carving out some time.
Yes, no problem. It was really fun.
Kiyoe, thank you so much for chatting with me. So great to talk to you across the world, which is very cool. But I'd love to do this again over Facebook Messenger or Skype, or even better in person. It'd be great, and I can't wait to follow along with what you're up to. Thank you for listening to these shows. I appreciate it so much. It's so fun for me to dig into the careers and perspectives and thoughts of people like Kiyoe, and I really appreciate it. If you ever want to reach out to me, feedback@contrabassconversations.com will put you in touch with me, and I'd love to hear from you, a little bit about you, where you're from, what you're up to these days, any ideas for the show. That would be great. Contrabass Conversations is produced by Michael Cooper, Steve Hinchy, Trevor Jones, and Mitch Mooring. Mitch makes beautiful bass in the Dallas area. If you're looking for a bass, look him up online at mitchmooring.com. I'm your host, Jason Heath, and we will see you again soon for more life in the low end of the spectrum.